For decades, just hearing the word exam was enough to make anyone's palms start sweating, right? But behind the scenes, the entire landscape of education is going through this massive, absolutely crucial transformation. We're finally shifting away from the intense stress of those single-day memory tests and moving toward a dynamic, student-centered approach to learning that actually builds real-world capabilities. Let's dive into this explainer and see exactly how it works. Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll be decoding assessment and evaluation, comparing formative and summative assessments, unpacking the CCEE framework, exploring taxonomies of learning, and finally, looking at the role of the modern teacher as a facilitator. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, decoding assessment and evaluation. So let's start with measurement. Basically, measurement is strictly about the numbers. It tells us how much. But, and this is key, it doesn't judge if that score is actually good or bad. It's kind of like measuring someone's height. 150 centimeters is just a fact. So if a student scores an 18 out of 20 on a math test, that 18 is our measurement. It's purely raw quantitative data. But as we all know, numbers don't tell the whole story. And that is exactly where assessment comes into play. Assessment answers the big question: what has been learned? It's a much more active process of gathering data. A teacher might assign a hands-on science project or simply observe how students are collaborating in groups. By collecting all this diverse evidence, the teacher gets a real-time, holistic look into a student's actual progress. And that brings us to evaluation. This is where we take all those raw numbers and observational insights and finally make a qualitative judgment. Evaluation essentially answers, how good is this performance? So the teacher looks at that 18 out of 20, reviews the science project, and concludes, wow, this is excellent. And it's this final decision that really guides the next steps in learning. To keep it super simple, just look at this breakdown. Measurement is your raw score, the how much. Assessment is the actual gathering of evidence, the what was learned. And evaluation is that final judgment, the how good. They're basically three distinct, interconnected steps in understanding a student's entire journey. Moving right along to Section 2, formative versus summative assessment. Let's look at the different ways we test. Timing is literally everything here. The when of a test completely changes its why. Think of formative assessment like a chef tasting a soup while they're cooking it. If it needs a little more salt, well, they fix it right then and there. It's continuous, it's low stakes, and it's incredibly helpful. Summative assessment, on the other hand, is when that soup is actually served to the customer. It's your final board exam. Now, both of these are definitely essential, but relying exclusively on summative exams, that's exactly what drives that massive, overwhelming student anxiety we talked about earlier. Which brings us to Section 3, the CCE framework. This is all about taking a much more holistic approach. To combat that heavy exam anxiety, the education system introduced CCE. Now, focus on those two key words, continuous and comprehensive. Continuous literally means we aren't waiting until December to see if you understood something back in September. We're checking in weekly. And comprehensive means we're finally acknowledging that a student is way more than just a math grade. We are evaluating their teamwork, their creativity, their behavior, the whole shebang, all year long. This whole holistic vibe is really the heartbeat of the National Curriculum Framework from 2005. The vision completely shifted from assessment of learning to assessment for learning. So instead of just parroting back memorized facts, the goal is true critical thinking and honestly joyful growth. If a kid is struggling with a concept, the system is designed to provide immediate diagnostic support. Rather than just stamping a big red failing grade on their paper and moving on, it's a total game changer. Okay, on to Section 4, taxonomies of learning. So how do we actually structure all this growth? Well, to measure holistic growth, teachers use scientific roadmaps like the revised Bloom's taxonomy. Picture it like a cognitive staircase. You really can't reach the very top and create a brand new science model until you've successfully climbed the bottom steps of remembering and understanding the basic facts. This framework brilliantly pushes assessments away from just lower order memorization all the way up to higher order critical thinking and creation. But, learning isn't purely mental, right? It's highly physical, too. R.H. Dave's psychomotor domain maps out exactly how we master hands-on skills from vocational training straight to the science lab. Think about typing on a keyboard. First, you just imitate. Then you manipulate the keys, maybe using a manual. Eventually, you get to precision. And by the final stage, naturalization, you're literally typing out an entire essay without even glancing down at your hands. Now that is true mastery. So, with all these complex frameworks and continuous evaluations happening constantly, you've got to wonder, where does the teacher actually fit into all of this without completely burning out?
Let's get into Section 5, the teacher as facilitator. It's all about guiding the journey.
The old days of a teacher just standing at a chalkboard lecturing for an hour straight? Yeah, those are pretty much gone. The modern educator isn't just a judge wielding a red pen anymore. They are an active facilitator. They set really transparent goals and they adapt on the fly. Let's say half the class bombs a formative quiz. A facilitator doesn't just blame the students. They look at the data and realize, okay, my teaching method didn't quite land today, so let's try a totally different approach tomorrow. In this kind of environment, mistakes aren't punishments. They're literally the stepping stones for learning. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought to completely rethink what success in education actually looks like. Were the tests you took in school truly evaluating your whole complex potential? Or were they merely measuring how good your memory was on one specific Tuesday? We are fully entering an era where education finally recognizes that a human being is vastly more complex than a single percentage score. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning